You are about to hear exactly how Senator Ted Cruz orchestrated the most devastating constitutional destruction of Representative Adam Schiff in modern political history, a moment that fundamentally and permanently altered the trajectory of American governance. As a veteran of the political arena, a fellow public servant who has spent decades walking the polished marble corridors of the United States Capitol, I have borne witness to every conceivable variety of congressional maneuvering, partisan warfare, and political theater. I have seen the grandstanding. I have seen the bitter partisan bickering. And I have watched long-standing, seemingly invincible careers slowly erode under the crushing weight of public scandal and institutional decay. However, what transpired on that fateful day within the solemn wood-paneled walls of the Senate Intelligence Committee hearing room was something entirely unprecedented in the annals of American governance. It was an event of such seismic magnitude that it will undoubtedly be analyzed, debated, and taught by constitutional scholars for centuries to come. It was not mere political theater designed for the evening news clips, nor was it a superficial clash of opposing ideologies meant to rally a donor base. It was rather a surgical, methodical, and absolute dismantling of a powerful, entrenched figure who had convinced himself through years of unchecked authority and relentless media adulation that he was completely untouchable and entirely above the very laws he had sworn a sacred oath to uphold. The atmosphere in the chamber on that morning was thick, with an electric, almost suffocating anticipation that seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of the Capitol building. The network cameras from every major news organization were meticulously positioned and rolling, their red lights glaring, broadcasting live to millions of American citizens across the nation who were desperately hungry for a return to genuine constitutional accountability and transparency in a deeply cynical age. What those citizens were about to witness would ultimately surpass even the historic Watergate proceedings, outstripping them both in its profound, precedent-setting legal significance and its sheer, unadulterated political destruction. The air was heavy, the murmurs of the gathered press corps echoing off the vaulted ceilings, as everyone waited for the gavel to strike and the historical reckoning to begin. I watched closely from my vantage point in the gallery as Senator Ted Cruz finally entered the room, the heavy wooden doors swinging shut behind him with a resonant thud. He moved with the quiet, measured confidence of a seasoned constitutional scholar, a man who had clearly spent agonizing months meticulously preparing for this exact confrontation. It was evident in his posture that he had studied every statute, every precedent, and every piece of contradictory testimony until they were etched into his memory. In his right hand, he carried a weathered leather briefcase, an unassuming everyday object that, unbeknownst to the majority of the room at that moment, contained enough rigorously documented, heavily vetted evidence to abruptly and permanently end one of the most prominent political careers in Washington. His demeanor was striking in its absolute simplicity and profound lack of pretension. Dressed in a standard, unpretentious navy suit and sporting his distinctive wire-rimmed glasses, Cruz exuded a calm, steady Texas, bearing that stood in stark, almost jarring contrast to the explosive nature of the legal revelations he was preparing to unleash upon the committee and the watching world. He took his seat deliberately, organizing his notes with a terrifying, quiet efficiency. Moments later, the heavy doors opened once more, and Representative Adam Schiff made his highly anticipated entrance. He swept into the chamber with the unmistakable aura of a man who firmly believed he owned the room, an attitude heavily cultivated over years of wielding immense, rarely questioned investigative power as the former chairman of the Intelligence Committee. He carried himself with an imperial, almost aristocratic bearing, moving like a veteran, undefeated prosecutor who was thoroughly accustomed to obliterating any political opposition through the sheer unrelenting force of his own will and the unwavering backing of a sympathetic media establishment. Wearing an impeccably tailored, highly expensive suit, with his hair perfectly styled and flanked by an eager, whispering entourage of loyal former committee staff members, Schiff sent a clear, unspoken message to everyone present in the gallery. He was there to swat down this conservative senator from Texas, to humiliate him publicly, and to aggressively reaffirm his absolute dominance over the congressional narrative and the investigative apparatus of the United States government. The proceedings officially commenced when Chairman Marco Rubio, his face set in a mask of grim determination, struck his gavel, bringing the bustling, noisy room to an immediate anticipatory silence. Rubio formally announced that the focus of the day would be a rigorous examination of constitutional oversight and the strict accountability of Intelligence Committee operations, a subject that had long been shrouded in secrecy, partisan deflection, and institutional obfuscation. Sitting just a few rows back in the gallery, I could see Schiff immediately attempt to seize the absolute control of the narrative, just as he had done in countless televised hearings before. With a voice dripping in calculated California-style condescension and rehearsed arrogance, he deliberately targeted Cruz's background and political history. Schiff suggested, with a dismissive wave of his hand and a theatrical sigh designed for the cameras, that someone who had struggled to win his own presidential primary, someone from the rough and tumble world of Texas politics, likely lacked the intellectual sophistication and the nuanced understanding required to comprehend the deep, shadowy complexities of serious intelligence work. He advised the senator, his tone mimicking a teacher scolding a slow student, to leave complex legal analysis and delicate constitutional interpretation to those who supposedly understood how real, high-level prosecutorial investigations were conducted. The liberal reporters packed into the gallery, many of whom had served as Schiff's loyal conduits for years, smirked in eager anticipation. They had their pens poised and their laptops open, ready to chronicle what they fully expected would be Schiff's effortless, humiliating intellectual demolition of a simple conservative politician who had dared to question the established order of the Washington elite. But Senator Cruz remained perfectly, almost unsettlingly, composed in the face of this barrage of insults. He sat quietly in his high-back leather chair, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses with a patient, unwavering Texas smile that never once faltered under the weight of the theatrical attack. He allowed Schiff's words to echo and fade in the vast room, refusing to be baited into a petty emotional response. When he finally spoke, his deep Texas drawl carried across the dead-silent room with an undeniable, resonant authority that commanded instant respect. He politely thanked Schiff for bringing up the topic of legal credentials and then proceeded to deliver a devastatingly precise, thoroughly devastating recitation of his actual background, a background that few in modern American politics could match. Cruz detailed his graduation from Harvard Law School with magna cum laude honors, a testament to his rigorous intellectual foundation. He mentioned his prestigious, highly coveted role on the Harvard Law Review and his service as a law clerk to the late Chief Justice William Rehnquist of the United States Supreme Court, an experience that immersed him in the highest echelons of American jurisprudence. He then elaborated, his voice gaining a hard edge of prosecutorial steel, on his 5 years serving as the Solicitor General of Texas. During this period, he personally argued 9 complex, high-stakes cases before the United States Supreme Court, successfully winning 5 of them, including landmark, heavily scrutinized constitutional defenses regarding the Ten Commandments Monument and the Pledge of Allegiance. I felt the atmosphere in the chamber shift perceptibly. The temperature seemingly dropped as the reality of the situation set in. The man Schiff had just lazily attempted to belittle as an intellectual lightweight was instantly revealed to be one of the most highly credentialed, battle-tested constitutional lawyers in the entire American government, possessing a level of Supreme Court experience that vastly overshadowed anything in Schiff's own prosecutorial background. Schiff's smugness began to evaporate, replaced by a sudden dawning realization that he had willingly walked into a meticulously laid constitutional trap. With his intellectual authority firmly and irrevocably established, and the gallery now hanging on his every word, Cruz reached for his battered leather briefcase. The soft click of the brass latch echoed through the dead-silent chamber like the opening notes of a constitutional funeral march, signaling the beginning of the end for Schiff's carefully constructed facade. He declared to the room, his eyes locked onto Schiff, that personal credentials matter far less than the truth, that constitutional principles are the bedrock of the Republic, and that the solemn oath of office matters above all else, especially when that oath is systematically betrayed. Cruz produced a thick, intimidating folder, heavily marked with official federal seals and boldly labeled in blood-red ink as the Durham Report findings. He systematically challenged Schiff's arrogant claim of conducting proper, unbiased congressional investigations by introducing the official, irrefutable conclusions of Special Counsel John Durham, a universally respected prosecutor whose mandate was to uncover the truth behind the origins of the Russia investigation. I watched Schiff stiffen in his chair. His posture became suddenly rigid, visibly attempting to project a hollow confidence as he fell back on his well-rehearsed, politically safe talking points about following proper procedures and pursuing credible threats to national security. However, Cruz easily bypassed this weak rhetorical defense, sharply pointing out that constitutional lawyers rely on strictly documented, incontrovertible evidence, not inspiring, media-trained stories designed for primetime cable news audiences. He dramatically displayed the central conclusion of the massive 306-page Durham Report directly on the chamber's large, high-definition monitors for all the world to see. The text, blown up in massive font, stated with devastating clarity that neither United States law enforcement nor the intelligence community possessed any actual evidence of collusion when they hastily and aggressively launched the Crossfire Hurricane investigation into the former president in 2016. Cruz paused, letting the heavy, profound implications sink into the consciousness of the room and the millions watching at home. He emphasized the phrase, "no actual evidence," noting that this was not a partisan talking point, but the definitive, legally binding finding of a federal prosecutor wielding immense subpoena power and comprehensive access to the nation's most closely guarded secrets. Cruz then signaled to his aides, who unveiled a massive, comprehensive presentation board detailing a chronological, day-by-day timeline of what he described as a campaign of systematic, deliberate public deception orchestrated from the highest levels of the Intelligence Committee. The board showed that the FBI explicitly knew the primary document, the infamous Steele dossier, was entirely unverified and highly likely to be deliberate Russian disinformation as early as January 2017. Yet, despite possessing this critical exculpatory knowledge, in March 2017, Schiff brazenly and theatrically read those very same salacious, unverified allegations directly into the official congressional record, granting them the false veneer of institutional legitimacy. With surgical prosecutorial precision, Cruz pointed out that between 2017 and 2019, Schiff made an astounding 73 separate, highly publicized television appearances, specifically claiming that more than circumstantial evidence of collusion existed. Cruz confronted Schiff directly, staring him down across the mahogany table with an unwavering, piercing gaze. He stated that the official findings definitively proved Schiff knew from the very beginning that no such evidence ever existed, and that his television appearances were nothing more than a calculated, multi-year campaign of deception. He openly, forcefully accused the former chairman of either committing systematic perjury or knowingly deceiving the American people for 3 agonizing years, intentionally using his powerful, highly respected committee position to lend unwarranted credibility to false narratives that tore the country apart. Furthermore, the destruction in this first round was not limited to television appearances. Cruz presented horrifying, newly declassified internal email communications revealing that Schiff's senior staff had actively used their congressional authority to aggressively pressure, coerce, and intimidate independent university researchers. When one principled academic researcher correctly and bravely noted that engaging in partisan political research was highly inappropriate for a publicly funded university, Schiff's staffer coldly and arrogantly responded in writing that they, the committee, were now in charge. Cruz thundered, his voice echoing off the walls, that this was not constitutional oversight, but rather the outright tyrannical intimidation of American citizens, a grotesque abuse of the immense power of their own government designed to force compliance with a manufactured political narrative. To close this devastating initial phase, Cruz moved to his next piece of evidence, displaying side-by-side visual comparisons of Schiff's sworn testimony alongside official, unredacted investigative transcripts. He showed video clips of Schiff explicitly testifying under oath, under penalty of perjury, that he had no prior contact whatsoever with a specific, highly controversial whistleblower whose complaint sparked a national crisis. Cruz then immediately contrasted this definitive sworn statement directly with Durham's documentary evidence, which conclusively, undeniably proved Schiff's top staff had met with that exact individual multiple times in secret, long before a formal complaint was ever submitted through proper channels. Cruz highlighted at least 17 separate, rigorously documented instances where official federal records flatly and entirely contradicted Schiff's sworn public statements. He coldly reminded the room, his voice taking on the grim tone of a judge delivering a sentence, that perjury is a severe federal felony punishable by up to 5 years in federal prison, and that no member of Congress, regardless of their media profile, is immune from the consequences of lying under oath. Following a brief, highly tense 15-minute recess, during which Schiff visibly struggled to maintain his composure, sweating profusely and furiously huddling with his visibly shaken legal counsel in a desperate attempt to formulate a counter-strategy, Cruz initiated the second phase of his relentless, methodical presentation. As a seasoned politician, I know that surviving one bad round of questioning is possible, but Cruz was systematically, ruthlessly closing every single avenue of escape, leaving Schiff boxed in by his own documented history. This second segment focused entirely on the mechanisms of the impeachment proceedings, a process Schiff had championed and led with a fervent, almost religious zeal. Cruz, leaning heavily on his deep expertise as a constitutional scholar, opened a new, thicker folder bearing the official, gold-embossed seals of the House Judiciary Committee. He eloquently and passionately explained the profoundly sacred nature of the impeachment power, an awesome authority granted solely to the House of Representatives by Article 1 of the Constitution. He reminded the completely silent chamber that the brilliant founding fathers designed impeachment not as a routine political maneuver, but as a solemn, ultimate constitutional remedy reserved strictly for high crimes and misdemeanors that threatened the very survival of the republic, not as a partisan weapon to be wielded lightly against a political opponent. He then directed the committee's attention to the monitors, displaying the official, heavily scrutinized transcript from the 26th of September 2019 impeachment hearing. He directly juxtaposed the actual documented words spoken by the former president during a controversial phone call with Ukrainian President Zelensky against the fabricated, heavily dramatized summary that Schiff had presented to the American public in his opening statement. Cruz highlighted word by word how Schiff had completely invented dialogue, falsely and maliciously telling the nation that the president had explicitly demanded that the Ukrainian leader make up dirt on a political opponent, a total fabrication of the historical record, when Schiff desperately attempted to defend his indefensible, unprecedented actions by stammering that the summary was clearly meant as a parody to merely illustrate the import and underlying meaning of the president's words. Cruz dismantled the pathetic argument instantly. With theatrical precision and biting sarcasm, Cruz raised an eyebrow, leaned into his microphone, and challenged Schiff to locate the exact clause, the specific sentence in Article 1 of the United States Constitution that permits impeachment managers to utilize parody as factual evidence in solemn constitutional congressional proceedings designed to remove a duly elected president. Cruz forcefully argued that nowhere in the sprawling volumes of the Federalist Papers, nor in the founding documents, is it ever suggested that elected officials can fabricate evidence, invent dialogue, or intentionally mislead the public during the most serious, consequential process our system of government provides. He declared, his voice ringing with moral clarity, that this was not parody, but rather a profound, unforgivable constitutional fraud committed against the American people, a betrayal of the highest order. The Texas senator then produced another devastating, meticulously researched chronological timeline, this one explicitly documenting the secret, highly unethical behind-the-scenes coordination regarding the initial impeachment complaint. He showed, using heavily redacted but clear email logs, how Schiff staff held multiple documented clandestine meetings with the prospective whistleblower in late July 2019, weeks before the explosive complaint was officially filed in August. He revealed, to the audible gasps of the gallery, that Schiff's office even suggested specific, legally actionable language for the document to ensure it met the threshold for congressional action. Yet, despite this intimate, deep-level coordination, on September 9th, Schiff looked directly into the lenses of national television cameras and categorically told the American public that they had not spoken directly with the whistleblower. Cruz explicitly accused Schiff of orchestrating the entire charade from start to finish, drafting the script, coaching the language, and then deliberately, repeatedly lying about his direct involvement to lend false credibility to what was essentially a highly orchestrated, deeply partisan political operation disguised as a solemn constitutional proceeding. Cruz then detailed how the minority party's fundamental constitutional rights were systematically, ruthlessly, and unprecedentedly denied during the entirety of the impeachment inquiry. He meticulously listed the outright denial of 17 separate Republican witness requests without any substantive explanation, the execution of secret underground bunker depositions held entirely without minority party participation, the strategic highly coordinated, selective leaking of out-of-context testimony to friendly media outlets to shape the evening news, the refusal to allow cross-examination of key central witnesses, and the deliberate, malicious exclusion of exculpatory evidence from the final official committee report, Cruz reminded the silent chamber that the Constitution does not just protect the rights of the ruling majority party. Due process matters, minority rights matter, and truth matters, even in the heated crucible of a congressional investigation. He boldly accused Schiff of turning the sacred impeachment process into a Soviet-style show trial, a kangaroo court where the outcome was predetermined before the first gavel fell, and where truth was sacrificed on the altar of political expediency. As the ultimate, unassailable proof of his damning claims, Cruz reached for a single stark white document, House Resolution 521. He read the official document aloud with ceremonial precision, his voice carrying the weight of history, reminding everyone present that on the 21st of June, 2023, the United States House of Representatives voted 213 to 209 to formally censure Adam Schiff. The resolution stated clearly, in black and white, that Schiff was censured for misleading the American public and engaging in conduct grossly unbecoming of an elected member, specifically noting that he severely abused his sacred trust by alleging he had concrete evidence of collusion and engaged in rampant falsehoods, misrepresentations, and abuses of highly sensitive information. Cruz emphasized, staring directly at Schiff, that this was not mere partisan rhetoric from a political opponent, but a formal, historic finding of fact by Schiff's own Democratic and Republican colleagues, a permanent stain on his record that could never be erased. The atmosphere in the room, already suffocating and tense, grew even more intense, taking on the heavy air of a national security tribunal as Cruz moved into his third and arguably most destructive subject, the deeply concerning, legally perilous handling of classified intelligence. As someone who deeply understands the gravity of national security protocols, I felt a physical chill run down my spine as Cruz prepared to unveil this section of his case. With a solemn, deeply authoritative demeanor, Cruz stood in the center of the chamber and recited entirely from memory the strict, unyielding Intelligence Committee oath. He emphasized the sacred, life and death commitment to protect classified information and to bear true, unwavering faith and allegiance to the Constitution and laws of the United States, rather than prioritizing a political party, a media narrative, or personal vendettas. He then presented a meticulous, terrifyingly precise, minute-by-minute chronological record of unauthorized, highly damaging disclosures. Cruz documented exactly 47 separate, provable instances where Schiff attended highly classified, deeply sensitive briefings regarding ongoing operations and intelligence methods. He showed that on specific dates, such as the 15th of January 2018, regarding highly classified FISA applications, and the 3rd of February 2018, regarding deeply sensitive FBI surveillance methods, the highly specific, intricately detailed contents of those briefings miraculously appeared in exclusive breaking news reports on CNN, MSNBC, and the Washington Post just hours after Schiff left the secure, soundproof room. Cruz forcefully characterized this alarming pattern not as a series of unfortunate coincidences or aggressive journalism, but as a deliberate, systematic, and highly illegal weaponization of America's most sensitive secrets, leaked for the sole purpose of partisan political warfare against a sitting president. To vividly illustrate the extreme gravity and legal peril of these actions, Cruz stepped over to a large whiteboard and began outlining the relevant, unforgiving federal statutes in stark black marker. He detailed Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 798, regarding the unauthorized disclosure of classified information, noting it carries a maximum penalty of 10 years in federal prison. He listed Section 641 regarding the outright theft of government property, carrying another 10 years, and Section 371 regarding conspiracy to defraud the United States, carrying an additional 5 years. Cruz coldly noted, tapping the marker against the board, that these are profound, serious federal felonies that would send ordinary American citizens, military personnel, or low-level contractors to maximum security prison for decades. Yet Schiff seemed to arrogantly believe his political title and media connections provided him with absolute blanket immunity from the laws he helped write. The hearing then took a dramatic, unprecedented turn that left the entire room stunned when Cruz formally activated a highly secure, encrypted video connection, established specifically for deeply classified intelligence community testimony. He announced that due to strict, uncompromising national security requirements, a witness would testify regarding the severe, real-world operational damage caused directly by the committee's leaks. A figure appeared on the large monitor, completely cloaked in deep shadow, utilizing severe robotic voice modulation technology to protect their true identity and ensure their safety. This authorized, highly ranked senior intelligence officer from the Central Intelligence Agency provided chilling, utterly devastating testimony that silenced even the most hardened reporters in the gallery. The officer testified, reading from a prepared, declassified summary, that the unauthorized disclosures originating directly from the committee during Schiff's chairmanship had irrevocably compromised at least 12 ongoing, highly sensitive intelligence operations globally. Furthermore, the officer stated that the leaks forced the immediate, panicked withdrawal of 3 vital, highly placed intelligence assets from hostile foreign countries and resulted in the catastrophic, irreversible exposure of advanced intelligence gathering methods that had taken American agencies decades and billions of dollars to develop. Most disturbingly, the witness revealed the staggering, tragic human cost of these political games. 2 highly trained intelligence officers operating under deep, non-official cover were directly compromised and had to be emergency extracted from extremely hostile territory, nearly losing their lives as a direct, traceable result of specific classified information that appeared in media reports sourced back to the committee. The silence in the room was absolute. Cruz's voice grew heavy with profound moral weight as he stated that Schiff had recklessly, callously placed the lives of brave American intelligence officers in severe, immediate jeopardy merely to score fleeting, cheap political points on evening cable news. He accused Schiff of entirely perverting the core constitutional responsibility of congressional oversight, transforming the solemn duty to protect sensitive information into a crass, dangerous mechanism for personal political warfare, prioritizing his own profile over the lives of American patriots. Just when I, and surely everyone else in the stunned, exhausted room, believed the revelations could not possibly become any more damaging or comprehensive, Cruz seamlessly introduced the 4th and final phase of his exhaustive investigation. He shifted the intense, unyielding focus to the massive, highly lucrative financial ecosystem that had been actively, greedily built around these prolonged actions and constitutional abuses. He bluntly, forcefully accused Schiff of transforming his sacred constitutional position and his multi-year campaign of deception into a sprawling, multi-million-dollar personal enrichment enterprise. Cruz reached for his final, thickest folder and began rapidly presenting comprehensive, meticulously audited financial disclosure forms, complex publishing contracts, and detailed ethics violation documentation. He demonstrated exactly how the systematic misrepresentation of intelligence was ruthlessly, efficiently monetized for personal gain. He highlighted a staggering, highly unusual $1.2 million book advance from the publishing giant Random House for a publication dramatically titled Midnight in Washington. Cruz noted the damning timeline. The massive contract was signed and the book was published while Schiff was still publicly, forcefully claiming evidence of collusion existed, right before the independent Durham Report definitively, unequivocally proved all those claims were entirely false and fabricated. Cruz boldly labeled this a blatant form of highly profitable literary fraud, designed explicitly for massive personal enrichment built upon a foundation of verifiable lies. He then documented, using public financial filings, over $800,000 in premium, highly paid speaking fees collected since 2017 from highly prestigious, elite institutions like the University of California, Berkeley, the Harvard Kennedy School, Georgetown Law Center, and Yale Law School. Schiff was being paid upwards of $50,000 per single event to speak authoritatively on defending democracy and prosecutorial integrity, all while actively, knowingly pushing narratives he absolutely knew were entirely unsupported by the official classified intelligence he had access to. Cruz vehemently accused him of corrupting legal education itself, spreading disinformation to the next generation of American lawyers and leaders while lining his own pockets. Furthermore, Cruz exposed a staggering, almost unbelievable sum of over $2 million in heavily documented media appearance contracts. This included a lucrative $15,000 per month permanent retainer as an MSNBC contributor and massive $5,000 per appearance consultation fees from CNN, all paid directly to Schiff for his supposed insider, expert perspective on investigations that were, at their core, fundamentally fraudulent and politically motivated. Cruz argued, outlining the legal theory with brutal clarity, that using a powerful committee position to access highly classified data, selectively leaking that data to build an unearned media credibility, and then shamelessly monetizing that fraudulent credibility through massive corporate contracts amounted to the very definition of racketeering under federal law. However, the most staggering, emotionally potent, and politically devastating figure Cruz presented was regarding Schiff's vast, nationwide campaign finance operations. He detailed, using FEC filings, how Schiff raised an astonishing $32.4 million for his Senate campaign since 2021. Cruz noted that this massive, unprecedented war chest was built primarily by sending out 847 separate, highly emotive fundraising emails, specifically repeatedly citing his fabricated Trump investigation experience and his supposed role as the savior of the Republic. He pointed out the heartbreaking, infuriating reality of the donor base. The average donation to this massive fund was a mere $47, coming almost entirely from working class, everyday Americans who genuinely, earnestly believed they were financially supporting a brave, embattled truth teller fighting against immense corruption. Cruz delivered a harsh, devastating moral condemnation that rang through the chamber. He stated that Schiff had actively, knowingly solicited hard-earned money from struggling families, teachers, and nurses based entirely on a foundation of deliberate constitutional lies, effectively, callously betraying the very citizens he hypocritically claimed to represent, protect, and fight for. Summarizing the entire sprawling, horrifying case on the whiteboard, Cruz listed a breathtaking, historically unprecedented array of severe ethical and legal violations. He categorized them meticulously into constitutional crimes, including systematic perjury and gross impeachment fraud, federal crimes involving the reckless mishandling of classified information and political racketeering, financial crimes, including potential heavily documented money laundering and wire fraud tied to media contracts, and profound ethics violations, including the absolute undeniable misuse of taxpayer resources for massive personal business and enrichment. Cruz thundered, his voice reaching a crescendo of righteous anger, that this was not a simple political disagreement or a difference in policy, but a coordinated, systematic enterprise designed specifically to defraud the American people and enrich a single corrupt politician. Adam Schiff, once the dominant, feared, universally praised prosecutorial force in Washington politics, sat at his witness table looking like a broken, shattered statue. His expensive suit was visibly wrinkled with cold perspiration, and his eyes appeared vacant, staring off into space as the accumulated, crushing, undeniable weight of the meticulously presented evidence pressed down upon him, dismantling his legacy piece by piece. In a final, utterly desperate, flailing act of political self-preservation, Schiff lashed out. His voice shook violently with a mixture of raw desperation and barely controlled, impotent rage. He attempted to aggressively, loudly dismiss Cruz as nothing more than a failed presidential candidate from Texas who was merely seeking petty partisan revenge for a successful, necessary impeachment inquiry. Falling back on his deeply familiar, heavily rehearsed, but now hollow identity politics playbook, Schiff claimed, his voice cracking, that he had dedicated his entire flawless career to defending democracy and protecting national security from authoritarian threats. He shouted that the entire hearing was nothing but a massive partisan distraction, a witch hunt orchestrated by those who blindly demanded loyalty to Trump and refused to accept the legitimate, necessary results of effective, courageous congressional oversight. He wildly and frantically accused Cruz of representing everything wrong with conservative politics, of tearing down institutions, and of failing to understand the deep, necessary complexities of modern constitutional challenges in a dangerous world. Cruz, maintaining his gentlemanly, unruffled demeanor, simply sat back and waited patiently for the desperate, embarrassing tantrum to finally conclude. He did not interrupt, allowing Schiff to fully display his unraveling state to the world. When Schiff finally fell completely silent, breathless, sweating, and shattered, Cruz leaned forward and delivered the ultimate, decisive, final blow. He calmly adjusted his glasses and stated, in a voice of quiet, terrible authority, that the proceedings were absolutely not about himself, and they certainly were not about Donald Trump, a man who wasn't even in the room. They were strictly, entirely, and unequivocally about Schiff's systematic, years-long violation of every sacred constitutional oath he had ever taken since entering public service. Cruz emphasized the fundamental bedrock constitutional principle that absolutely no one, no matter how many television appearances they make, no matter how many books they sell, no matter how much praise they receive from the coastal elite, is above the law, regardless of their high political position or their lofty hypocritical claims of moral authority. He pointed once more with a sweeping gesture to the massive presentation board summarizing the years of calculated cynical deception, the 73 demonstrably false television claims, the blatant unconstitutional manipulation of solemn impeachment proceedings, the severely compromised, deadly national security operations, and the millions of dollars generated through an unprecedented, calculated breach of public trust. To drive the emotional point home and to bring the abstract constitutional concepts into sharp human focus, Cruz displayed large photographs of ordinary Americans on the monitors. He pointed to a picture of the Martinez family from Arizona, noting Maria was a hardworking public school teacher and her husband served honorably in the Army, who donated $25 they could barely spare. He showed Robert Chen, a struggling small business owner from Michigan who sent $50 during a difficult economic time, and Sarah Williams, an exhausted nurse from North Carolina who donated $35 after a long shift. Cruz stated with profound, unshakable moral weight that these were the specific, real, hardworking Americans whose faith in constitutional government, whose trust in their leaders had been systematically, callously destroyed by Schiff's decades of deception. Schiff was left completely speechless, hyperventilating slightly, sinking lower into his chair, entirely unable to muster any coherent legal, factual, or political defense against the meticulously documented, devastating reality of his actions. As Cruz calmly packed his leather briefcase, snapping the latches shut, and coldly declared that the class was permanently dismissed, the chamber erupted into a massive, deafening standing ovation that lasted over 20 continuous minutes, a release of years of pent-up frustration and a celebration of long-delayed accountability. The massive immediate aftermath of this historic confrontation reshaped the American political landscape almost instantly, sending shockwaves through every corridor of power in Washington. Within 48 hours, the unedited raw footage of the hearing became the most viral, widely shared political content in internet history, quickly amassing over 200 million views across various platforms, transcending partisan lines and reaching ordinary citizens who rarely followed congressional hearings. Even major, traditionally friendly news networks like CNN and MSNBC, which had happily platformed Schiff for years, were forced by the sheer weight of the evidence to publicly acknowledge the completely irrefutable nature of the case presented by the senator from Texas. The leadership of the Democratic Party went into a state of absolute, unprecedented, panicked crisis mode. Realizing the sheer, undeniable, toxic scale of the documented deception, high-ranking officials rapidly scrambled to distance themselves from a man they had once heralded as a hero. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries quickly announced his immediate, unequivocal withdrawal of all party support for Schiff's ongoing Senate campaign, stating that the incontrovertible evidence presented required a complete, immediate reevaluation of confidence. Simultaneously, Senator Cruz's national approval rating skyrocketed to an astounding historic 91%, which included a remarkable, unprecedented 73% approval among registered Democrats who, despite policy disagreements, deeply appreciated his unwavering, brilliant defense of basic constitutional integrity and absolute truth. Spontaneous, highly organized, well-funded grassroots movements advocating for Cruz to be immediately appointed as a Supreme Court justice began to erupt nationwide, viewing him as the ultimate defender of the founding documents. Law schools across the entire country, including Harvard, immediately integrated his methodical, evidence-based, devastatingly effective approach into their core curricula as the absolute new gold standard for constitutional advocacy and investigative procedure. Adam Schiff's long, powerful political career collapsed virtually overnight, a spectacular fall from grace rarely seen in modern history. Within a week, he was forced to permanently suspend his Senate campaign, officially resign, in disgrace from all his remaining committee positions, and face intense, ongoing federal criminal investigations into his financial dealings and handling of classified material. His lucrative speaking engagements were abruptly canceled, His massive media contracts were instantly terminated, and his book was pulled from publication amid loud legal demands that the $1 million advance be returned immediately due to blatant literary fraud. The sweeping, undeniable revelations triggered massive, historic institutional changes that would affect the government for generations. It prompted the largest, most comprehensive congressional investigation in American history, led by fiercely independent Special Prosecutor Robert Hur, to actively examine dozens of other members of Congress for similar patterns of intelligence abuse and corruption. Furthermore, the intelligence community swiftly implemented its most comprehensive, sweeping internal reforms since its initial creation after World War II to ensure the absolute prevention of any future political weaponization of classified information by ambitious politicians. 6 months later, Senator Cruz stood before a packed, completely silent joint session of Congress to deliver what became historically known as the Constitutional Restoration Address. Watched by hundreds of millions of citizens around the globe, he eloquently, passionately reminded the nation that the Constitution functions exactly, perfectly as the brilliant founding fathers intended, providing the necessary, sharp tools to hold corrupt, powerful officials accountable, provided that principled leaders possess the raw courage and the rigorous intellect to actually enforce it. Through this monumental, unforgettable display of accountability, public trust in the vital, battered institutions of the Republic began to finally heal, proving once and for all that constitutional truth, backed by undeniable evidence, can indeed triumph over systemic, deeply entrenched political deception.